Church of England. It's charismatic in the modern sense that it encourages ecstatic utterances known as speaking in tongues and spontaneous prophecy. And it's evangelical, strong on the certainties of Scripture. St Mark's, Kennington is one of the London churches that's been following up converts from this summer's Billy Graham crusade, a mission with record attendances that appeared to demonstrate a widespread hunger for this new version of old-fashioned Christianity. These Christians believe they're in the front line of a revival. For them, the religious summit in Rome is at worst a distraction, at best an irrelevancy. A laboriously slow process that's simply been overtaken by the Spirit.
It's possible for leaders to be out of touch with what God is doing. I think that their agenda can be at one level and God is working at a completely different level.
The thing with Runcie, he's coming from an angle which we can see as of joining up with this different faith, as it were, because it is a different faith, and all these other different faiths, and saying, let's work together and bring this type of unity, and we'll all be fine before God and all the rest of it. It doesn't work like that.
It's a bit of a sellout.
Yeah, I think it's out of order.
One wonders whether the divisions between the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church are not somewhat too deep for there to be any patching up.
Charismatic revivalism has touched Catholic churches, and individual Roman Catholics are joining in, supporting the Billy Graham mission and the recent nationwide March for Jesus. But not so far with the formal participation of Catholic parishes and their priests. Organisers of the so-called Decade for Evangelism, due to be launched next year, hope that barrier will be overcome as Catholic churches join them in a mission for the millennium. If they do, it will be a far cry from the bitterness of the past. The Apostle Paul had warned against dissensions and party spirit. Unity was supposed to enhance the Church's witness to the world. Texts drawn from declarations and articles of faith over the centuries following the Reformation reveal the depths of historic division between Anglican and Catholic.
The Roman pontiff, when he speaks from the throne, is endowed with infallibility.
The Bishop of Rome hath no jurisdiction in England.
If anyone presumes to contradict our definition, let him be anathema.
The Romish doctrine of purgatory and worshipping of images and relics is a fond thing vainly invented.
Schismatics and rebels, I will persecute.
Why, even your masses are blasphemous fables and dangerous deceits.
All other societies than ours, claiming the name of church, are guided by the spirits of darkness and sunk in pernicious error.
Oh, the detestable enormities of the Bishop of Rome.
Ordinations using the Anglican rite are utterly invalid and altogether void.
As for the Pope, I reject him as Christ's enemy.
Heretic!
And Antichrist.
Let him be accursed!
Controversies like these led to prominent figures on both sides of the argument being burnt at the stake. But in just the last few decades, theological disputes that dragged over centuries have been replaced by constructive dialogue. The two sides have moved with surprising speed towards unity. Dr. Runcie's visit to the Vatican is a return meeting for the Pope's pilgrimage to Canterbury 7 years ago. Christian summitry began in the 60s with the Second Vatican Council, which called for closer contacts. But these leaders are meeting for the 5th time and will be getting down to detailed talks. Dr. Runcie wants greater recognition for Anglicanism. In turn, he's ready to accept the Pope as the natural leader if unity can be achieved.
Dr. Runcie is bartering away the Protestant heritage of the Church of England. He'll be attending Mass at St. Peter's, which is condemned by the 39 Articles of the Church of England and indeed by Scripture. He has said he's prepared to acknowledge the authority of the Pope, for which he has no mandate from the General Synod. He ought to resign at this point, and we shall be at the airport tomorrow to tell him so.
Here is Dr. Runcie going to the very limit of what he's prepared to say about the papacy. This, if you like, is his big concession, and it's one that causes him trouble and leads to cause for his resignation. So he's making a big sacrifice on his part. But what answering voice will he get?
It's Catholic hesitation which will still keep the two leaders from actually taking communion together in Rome. Until they can, the schism of history cannot fully be healed.
Yes, please.
Find a bitter, please.
Thank you. Yes,
please.
Bishops from both sides have been involved in the nitty-gritty of negotiations for 20 years on a joint international commission. Co-chairman, Catholic Cormac Murphy O'Connor, and Anglican Mark Santa have become friends in the process. But they faced disappointments. The Commission's first report, intended to pave the way for joint communions, was welcomed by last year's Lambeth Conference, but has still not earned a response from the Vatican. Their second appeared to settle one of the disputes at the heart of the Reformation, but was criticised by Vatican doctrine experts. Are the Catholics simply refusing to give ground?
It's not a question of saying, we give this or you give that. No, how do you deepen and understand with dialogue, but also with faithfulness to what one's given, what are the fundamental doctrines of the Church?
So there can't be any compromise?
Ultimately, I think both Anglicans and Roman Catholics would not want compromise on what Christ has left to his Church.
One is totally unrealistic if one thinks that the Church or any other institution on this earth is ever going to be perfect. And I think we make mistakes if we suppose that we can only unite as Anglicans with the Roman Catholic Church when it is perfect. That's like saying we will never unite with it. And I would say the same vice versa. There has to come the point when you trust each other enough and have agreed sufficiently on enough basic points actually to take the plunge and move further together.
The momentum for unity gained new impetus today with the publication of the first ever ecumenical Bible, accepted by Anglicans and Catholics. The key verse, describing Peter as the rock on which the Church is built, which Catholics say makes him the first pope, is still a source of disagreement, but at least they've agreed on a text. Lord Coggan spent 15 painstaking years on the project, but he warns the slow quest for unity shouldn't make Anglicans forget their own urgent mission to Britain.
Well, I wouldn't wait. We've got to get on with the job. But let us pursue unity where we can without abandoning the great Reformation insights, and even more the New Testament insights. Let us go on with that. But meanwhile, the great hungry world is waiting, and we get on and we don't wait.
And the edifying of...
Along with a literary breakthrough, ecumenists can celebrate yesterday's relaunch of the British Council of Churches, with full Catholic involvement for the first time. Greater understanding was the aim of early Bible translators, but it's overshadowed by an issue they never foresaw. Despite last-minute pleading at the Lambeth Conference, American Anglicans this year went ahead and consecrated the world's first woman bishop. Other Anglican provinces that ordain women priests plan to follow suit. It's dealt a body blow to hopes of unity.
Well, there's no doubt about it that, and the Pope himself has said so, that the ordination of women, and especially the consecration of a bishop, a woman as bishop, they do constitute very considerable difficulties for us and for also the Orthodox churches. That's been said quite publicly and simply. But it's all the more important then that these leaders of the Anglican Communion and the Roman Catholic Church should meet and keep in touch, because in order to show that whatever differences and difficulties there are, the search for unity has to continue.
If women's ordination has pushed the Anglican Communion in a broadly liberal direction, under Pope John Paul, the Vatican has swung the other way. His uncompromising conservatism on moral questions that divide Anglicans and Catholics, such as contraception, is well known. But more important is the very un-Anglican emphasis on central authority.
The main thing to be said about Pope John Paul II is that he's a man obsessed with getting everybody's identity clear, the identity of the Catholic. What is a Roman Catholic? The identity of the priest. He's got to be properly dressed and pious and say his prayers and not engage in political activity. The nun and so on, properly dressed up. And getting identities straight, including the sort of total identity of the Church. Now that assertion of identity means an assertion of difference, and therefore doesn't naturally and spontaneously lead him into ecumenical activity.
So which faction then has gained the upper hand?
I think the key player in this business is Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, sometimes known as the Thought Crime Department. His function is to be responsible for orthodoxy in the Church. In the 1970s, alongside this body, there was the Secretariat for Christian Unity, and its function was to have dialogue with other Christians. The people concerned with dialogue are more concerned with finding common ground. People concerned with orthodoxy are more concerned to stress the remaining differences. What's happened now is that this concern for orthodoxy has prevailed, and the Secretariat has been subordinated to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger.
At his last major function before Rome, Dr. Runcie joined many of his bishops to celebrate an Anglican success, the Church Urban Fund, an inner-city initiative long demanded by activists. In its national mission, the Church is now seriously understaffed, and many believe only women priests could make up the numbers. Yet that would conflict sharply with attempts to reunite with Catholics. Bishops on both sides of the debate are well aware that the Vatican will try to influence that choice.
I think that they will hold up a larger picture to the Archbishop, which he may welcome, of course, but I think that they will probably say, look, it's such a very broad issue which would have tremendous repercussions. Don't do it.
I'm sure he will be subject to pressure, but he's a very resilient person, and I hope he'll stand firm and express where the Church of England is. We haven't decided this issue, but there are many people who hope we soon will. And I think, in a way, it is an example of what a universal primacy might be about. If it's about a monolithic authority which has the power to reach into every corner of the universe and make decisions for churches, then I personally wouldn't want to have anything to do with it.
Dr. Runcie is a champion of Anglicanism's more democratic style of authority, but he also places a high value on unity.
I'm looking forward to my visit to the Pope. One thing which is at the centre of my thoughts, and I believe at the centre of his, is that we do have a unity already which we enjoy, and we want to celebrate that, and whatever happens, that's something which should be done from time to time. It was done a few years ago in Canterbury. It will be done at Rome. So we shall start from the confidence that we do have a unity which we can celebrate. We don't have perfect unity, but there is something which we have, and sometimes people forget that.
Dr. Runcie will say Mass with the Pope this weekend in what will be heralded as a historic moment. The negotiations will continue. Their dialogue cannot be seen to have failed. But behind the scenes, the goal of unity will seem as elusive as ever.
Ready, steady, go!
Andrew Burrows reporting. And now today's main news stories and the business headlines. The pound fell again on the foreign exchanges today despite intervention by the Bank of England aimed at propping sterling up. The currency has been under pressure following the poor trade figures announced on Tuesday. Our business reporter Simon Gompertz explains why the bank is intervening and asks if the intervention is likely to succeed.
The city's losing its confidence in the pound, but the Chancellor's pledged to maintain its value as part of his fight against inflation. So he's directed the Bank of England to try to manage the currency.
He's using our foreign exchange reserves, which are held at the Bank of England. We hold dollars. He's selling those dollars and buying pounds on the foreign currency markets, trying to create a demand for sterling. He's also, in doing that, warning speculators that they shouldn't sell the pound too short, because if they get aggressively short of the currency, they will find themselves badly burned.
Help came from an unexpected quarter today as the United States Federal Reserve sold dollars for pounds as well. But the crucial line of defence for the Bank of England is an exchange rate of 3 German marks to the pound. That's a rate it's been slipping closer to all week.
Some time ago, the Chancellor was trying to prevent the 3 level against the Deutschmark from being breached on the upside. He was spending an awful lot of money selling pounds. Now, of course, he's doing the opposite. And at the moment, sterling is very vulnerable against the Deutschmark. If the 3 level were to go, and we're very close to that at the moment, then the Chancellor would have to do something on the interest rate front, because intervention, that is buying pounds, would have proved to be insufficient.
Nigel Lawson's showed no sign yet of raising interest rates again, but the city's afraid he's just waiting to get the Conservative Party conference out of the way next month before putting them up.
In spite of the intervention by the bank, the pound closed at $1.6110, down nearly 2/3 of a cent. Today's fall follows in the wake of smaller losses yesterday when the bank's support was more effective. Against the Deutschmark, the pound ended at 3 Deutschmarks 1.8 pfennigs, down 1.7 pfennigs on the day. The pound continues its slide towards 3 Deutschmarks, the level which could trigger an interest rate rise. The gloom spread to the stock exchange. The 100 index closed at 2291, down 40. The market trend is down because dealers are worried that sterling's weakness may prompt that rise in interest rates. In New York, the Dow Jones closed at 2694, up 21. In sharp contrast to London, dealers remain confident that shares will continue to head upward. Whitbread has taken over the brewing interests of Boddington's, makers of one of the country's best-known real ales. Whitbread is paying more than £53 million for the business. The high street electrical chain Dixons has warned that its sales are continuing to slow down. The firm has warned that there's no sign of any significant recovery for the rest of the financial year. Other news now. Police hunting the Deal bombers have issued artists' impressions of the 2 men they want to question in connection with the explosion that killed 10 men at the Royal Marines Music School last Friday. The 2 men are said to speak with Irish accents. The police are still appealing to the public for information. A British soldier serving in West Germany is to be brought for questioning in Northern Ireland concerning the alleged leaking of security force documents. A montage of photographs of IRA suspects that appeared in the Sun newspaper on the 21st of September will be the subject of the questioning. The Ministry of Defence has admitted a blunder after a temping agency in Glasgow became the recipient of 2 secret facsimile messages intended for the Ministry's office there. The documents contained a proposal to cut costs at a naval base by transferring guard duties to a private security firm. The threat of a worsening consumer crisis in Poland has led Solidarity's leader Lech Wałęsa to warn the country's new government that a further drop in living standards could lead to the prospect of civil war. His remarks followed a doubling of milk and fuel prices last Monday. The Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev visited the Ukraine today and personally witnessed the victory of his chosen candidate in a secret ballot to choose a new leader of the Ukrainian Communist Party. Also today, it was announced that one of Mr. Gorbachev's predecessors, Leonid Brezhnev, has been stripped of the Order of Victory medal he was awarded in his lifetime because he did not correspond to the status of the decoration. The Science Museum in London is to face prosecution under the Health and Safety at Work Act, following an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at the museum last March. 1 man died and 4 people were taken ill. The Radio Times and TV Times are to lose their joint monopoly to publish weekly television and radio listings as a result of measures contained in the forthcoming broadcasting bill. Other publishers will be able to buy the information from the BBC and other broadcasters. Nigel Mansell has threatened to retire from motor racing if his appeal against disqualification during last Sunday's Portuguese Grand Prix is not upheld. Mansell failed to obey black disqualification flags after illegally reversing his Ferrari in the pits. With the Labour Party conference now only a few days away and with electoral reform high on its agenda, a new opinion poll shows that Labour might gain some electoral advantage if it adopted proportional representation. In particular, the poll suggests that the middle-class Tory voters Labour needs to win over in the south of England could switch to a Labour Party with PR in its manifesto. Meanwhile, inside the party, one prominent backbencher, Dale Campbell-Savers, has launched his own favoured version of PR, and he claims that 100 Labour MPs now want to change the way we vote. Recently, in Labour's own magazine, Mr Kinnock himself has said that he's not against the growing debate on PR. Janet Trewin now reports on the pressures on the left for electoral reform.
In the London borough of Wandsworth today, they've been at the polls. It's a crucial council by-election. At stake is the control of the council itself, the privatising jewel in the Conservatives' local government crown. For Labour, it's a chance to deal an embarrassing blow at the very heart of Tory philosophy. The outcome depends, as ever, on British democracy. And for an increasing number of Labour voters, that's the problem.
The election in this Wandsworth Council ward is a typical example of the bizarre way in which our system works. And it's why increasingly Labour supporters, previously so opposed, are now considering electoral reform. Here, there are 5 candidates. Statistically, it's possible for any one of them to win with only 21% of the vote. But what's worse, because the local turnout might only be as low as 1/3, that means that the winner could possibly win with only 6% of the electoral support.
Find that the Electoral Reform Society...
Dale Campbell-Savers has been a Labour MP for 10 years. For all that time, he's opposed electoral reform. But last year, while trying to prove the case against proportional representation, he became a convert. Today at Westminster, he unveiled his very own form of PR, a unique invention called the supplementary vote. He's frustrated that Labour's policy review doesn't even mention reform of voting for the Commons. He says of the 125 Labour members he's asked, at least 100 of them, nearly half the party's MPs, are in favour of change.
Electoral reform is unavoidable. Electoral reform, based on a system other than first past the post, must provide for greater proportionality in the system. It's more democratic. The people of this country want it, and we must institute the change. We cannot go on waiting, and indeed, if I might say, being fearful of the consequences of changing the electoral system.
A stone's throw away at the head office of the prestigious Electoral Reform Society, there is now new evidence that this issue could be of incalculable importance to the newly energised Labour Party, evidence that Newsnight can exclusively reveal tonight. Simon Osborne at the ERS has been interpreting the results of a survey they commissioned to be published tomorrow. It will show that PR is not only on the agenda, today it's a major vote winner. The ERS poll asked people whether they were aware of PR or not. Just under half said they knew at least a little. Most of them were middle-aged and middle class. Of this key group, 42% were Conservatives and 35% Labour. But according to the poll, if Labour adopted a policy of PR, some Tory voters would change sides. The Conservative vote would drop to 38%, while Labour would rise in popularity to 42%, giving Labour electoral victory.
The significance of this poll is for the very first time the electorate seems